Thank you, Madam Chair, and also thank you, Representative Fox, for just the explanation that the committee, I apologize for coming in late. And I also want to thank the witnesses for being here and for your tireless work on this very issue of child abuse and neglect. I spent the majority of my adult life as a teacher. In fact, before coming to Congress, I was a classroom teacher, a mandated reporter, so I know exactly what you're talking about. And as some of my colleagues have expressed, I also recognize that abuse is not always blatant. You know, for me, it was neglect was more of a factor, you know, and understanding and recognizing what that meant and what that looked like. And in my community, in the city of Waterbury, where I taught, generally that was associated with addiction and trauma from addiction that really reverberated out into the entire family. In Waterbury, Connecticut, where I was a teacher, last year we had 85 opioid-related deaths. And in most of those families, there are children who are coming to school and they don't have a label that says, you know, my mom is an addict, or no one at home is feeding me, or my dad is in prison. And so a lot of this, it was up to the educator to have an appreciation and understanding of what they were seeing and, you know, what their responsibility was in that. This is something that was very important to me because I was one of those kids. I grew up in a home like that. And I guess what I want to make sure, and Ms. Jackson, my question is for you, being that we know that poverty is a risk for many of these young people, addiction is a risk, when we're responding to referrals for child maltreatment, how can we assure that we're addressing the underlying issues and not simply separating parents from children because they're poor or they don't have the background or the information they need?
Right. So I think that's a really important question because a lot of research that's been done through the years, especially in the early years of identifying child maltreatment, looked for correlates, right? Things that seem to be associated with abuse. What do these abused children and these abusive families have in common? Science has evolved tremendously since those early days, but some of the early findings are still with us, right, in terms of trying to clarify really what the active factors are. So to be clear, we are much better now in our place in our science of knowing what are the causal factors for child maltreatment. We're very clear about those things. What we notice about those families is that they have several things in common with each other. They're not always identical, but they have several things in common. There usually is a significant difficulty in support in those families, maybe some challenges with mental illness in the parents, maybe a tremendous amount of stress in the family, maybe there's a tremendous amount of conflict in the family. Lots of different things that we could point to that are active causal factors for child maltreatment. Poverty is not one of them. Okay, so I get that that's where in the beginning the thing that seemed to tie a lot of people together, right? But that actually isn't a factor that is an active ingredient in risk for child maltreatment. It's really the host of many other things that we know very well that contribute. So what prevention does is it speaks to those things. It speaks to the things that the science tells us actually make a difference. Right? Those things that are actually important in affecting change. The anecdotes we see a lot of still to this very day, but as a scientist, what I'm most interested in are the efforts that the prevention makes to tie to this, to what we know actually makes a difference. So prevention will tie to things like education and conflict resolution and giving support and resources to those families, regardless of economic background.
Thank you. I so appreciate you saying that. Ms. King, my next question is for you. Based on what we're talking about, how can we better prepare teachers and mandated reporters to ensure that bias is not a contributing factor when they are looking for signs and symptoms of abuse or neglect? I've seen many young people who come from families who did not have a lot of money, you know, who lived in poverty, but there was an abundance of love, and parents were doing the best they could, and someone from the outside looking in at that might not see the same things that I saw or be able to identify that this was a caring and supportive family. So how do we ensure that our teachers, our mandated reporters, the people on the receiving end of this information don't let their own biases get in the way?
Well, I think you nailed it very carefully about the disproportionality that we see in our system. And I think that's an ongoing struggle. It's an ongoing struggle in education for teachers. It's an ongoing struggle in early learning. And in reality, it's an ongoing struggle in child welfare as well. I picked up on your comment at the beginning. Thank goodness children aren't wearing the label about what they have going on at home, because we want our educators, the trusted adults that work with children, to see the strength, see their resiliency. And we want our network of the multidisciplinary approach to child well-being to respond looking at strengths. That's the important piece, and I think that's where I see a paradigm shift happening in prevention, is we're looking at strengths to build strong families. We have to focus on harm when it's occurred, but if we're looking upstream, we're looking at building strengths in families.